faithfully fund your local church and watch it begin to thrive. So I'm telling you, if you're in consumer debt, you will not get out of it unless you first start obeying Jesus with the tithe.
You have a responsibility to provide for those who are feeding you. You're not going to do any good by like starving them financially.
And what I tell pastors is, it's your obligation to have more vision for the kingdom than the business owners in your church have for their business. All right, back for part 2 of Jesus, money, and the tithe. If you're just checking in, welcome to Strong Nation Podcast. Here in the studio, Jeff Weber, dear friend, Jeff and Becky, longtime friends at Grace City Church, on our ESAT team, on our legacy team, entrepreneur, businessman, bow hunter, elk killer, all-around good dude. And then there's Kyle Strong, who is he's a pastor.
That's what I do.
Have you ever killed anything, Kyle?
Not anything that
you want to talk about?
Yeah, I want to talk about. Yeah.
Spiders don't count.
Cockroaches, mice.
You never killed anything worth noting.
Yeah. No, Kyle's CFO, COO, XP at Grace City Church, managing a lot of spinning plates, and has a background in finance, banking, CPA at a firm. Up for partner, I think, when we had you come over, and they were offering you a partner with a lot of money, and we baited him to Grace City with
promised hunts, future kills.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
No, it's that's a whole nother podcast. How you and Laura got to Grace City. It's pretty fun. So, I preached a sermon on tithing last week, and then we got a ton of great questions in. A lot of practical questions, how-to questions. Some, why do I have 2 questions? Were kind of fun to kick around. We batted around some of those in our last podcast. We only got to 1 question.
Yeah.
We got a ton of questions online from Instagram as well. So if you submitted a question and you're listening, thank you so much. And we want to get to them and see if we can answer as many as we can. And let's kind of go rapid fire. We boiled dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of questions down to like 15 or 20. And so we kind of went long form ramble last time. Let's see if we can like stick to the questions. And Kyle, if you could just be more succinct in your answers next time, that'd be great.
Very hard.
And because we know that's not a problem I have. So okay, fire away. We'll
we
go
go.
rapid fire.
Okay. Will you speak to the idea of tithing through action? In other words, does serve tithing work? What they're getting at, I think, is can we volunteer, can we serve at church in place of actually giving money?
Yeah.
Tithing.
Yeah. No.
Why?
Next question. I was trying to be efficient, bro. Hey, for the record, too, I'm a pastor. Kyle's a pastor. Jeff is not a pastor, a layman, businessman, and so he's here to bring that perspective too. So you can jump in when you want. No. Here's why. Because they're not categorically the same. I don't know. I was like, we talk about time, treasure, talents. Your time is not your talent. Your talent is not your treasure. Your treasure is not your time. They are different things. Oftentimes, someone who says, "Well, I want to give of my time, not my treasure," is someone who thinks they can't afford to tithe. And what I would tell someone who doesn't think they can afford to tithe is that you can't afford not to.
Yeah.
You're already postured wrongly in your heart.
Yeah.
You think you need that extra 10% in order to survive. You're already sowing the seeds for discontentment. And you could make $1 million a year and never have enough with that attitude. And so you got to get on that right now.
Yeah.
And that's not to belittle anyone who's serving. Serving's a big deal. Your heart needs both. But they are categorically different things.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had in the past, we've had some people who are just like serve all the time. And it's like, and then, you're a Chris, check the tithing records and they don't give it all.
Right.
And we're like, hey, are you here all the time because you think you're making up for the tithe? And they're like, yeah. It's like, oh dear, let's talk about this. You know what I mean?
Yep.
This is not how this works. You should serve, yes, and you should give, yes, and you shouldn't kill yourself doing either as some act of legalistic winning my way to heaven. You're doing both in response to Jesus as an act of worship.
Yeah.
And so, no, serve tithing isn't tithing. Serving is serving, and tithing is tithing. A giving of the first fruit 10% of your money.
That's right.
Because God never calls us to a sacrificeless Christianity.
Right.
And if you're doing an equation between serving with my time hurts less than giving of my money, that's the wrong equation.
Right.
Right. Part of the purpose of tithing is to daily, weekly, monthly, yearly remind our hearts that we need to trust Jesus for our provision and not our own ability to make money for provision. So that's how I would say as a pastor.
Yeah.
Now, as someone, Jeff, who your wife serves a ton, Becky, you guys have talked with you've approached me. You said we are structuring our life so Becky doesn't have to work, and we're doing that to free her up so she can serve. And so you're out killing the meat, and Becky's cooking it. As far as the kingdom, you're killing the kingdom meat with the business. She's cooking the kingdom meat as far as serving. And then you serve too. You're on the ESAT team. That takes hours and hours of your life out of your month. You answer the phone every time I call. You're serving on legacy team. You're praying with folks after church. So you're serving with your time. But you guys have kind of drawn that delineation there between you guys. But Becky makes all the decisions of finances with you, and you're out in front leading the business. Anything to add to that as far as someone who would say is serving? Does that count as tithing?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say this is less pastoral and more practical. But the church can't pay their electrical bill with your time. Unfortunately, that's it's unfortunate, but we can't submit with our bill a slip of how many hours we served.
That's good.
So we need money.
That's good.
And that's just reality. And so that's Jesus foresaw that. He knows that the church needs money, and so he is absolutely specifically talking about money when he's talking about tithing. Secondly, if you want the blessing of spiritual of financial return on your money, the way God has designed the world is the harvest is always tied to the nature of the seed that's planted. So if you want if you want financial blessing from God, you need to sow a seed of finances, because that is how God has designed the world. You can't plant a tomato seed and expect to get jalapenos. Right? And that is the way God has wired the world. He has all these agricultural examples in
Metaphors,
the Bible, but the seed is always the same. The harvest is always the same nature as the seed that is planted. And God returns financial blessing when you give financially. So I understand people want to serve with their time, but you're bypassing some of the blessing that comes with giving out of your wallet.
Dude,
that's good.
That's really good.
Really good.
Boom.
Yep.
Second question. Done.
All right,
I feel momentum.
Here we go.
Making headway.
Does tithing have to be to a church, your local church, or can we give to Christian nonprofit organizations? Maybe like a missionary.
Yeah. Well, there's no Bible verses for this, so I'm just going to give practical wisdom. But my answer would be, is this thing keep sinking low? I'm like, what in the world? Okay.
It is sinking.
Note to production team. Let's spend $50 and get a better boom here. Okay. We can edit that out. Here's how I'd answer that question. The church is God's means of bringing about the kingdom. 501c3 nonprofit organizations aren't.
Right.
So I would draw a separation there between where I give. So Sharon and I have given to nonprofits. We give to Stronger Man Nation. That's a nonprofit. You shouldn't be giving 10% of your tithe to Stronger Man Nation.
Right.
You should be, if you're listening online and you live somewhere else, you should be giving 10% to your local church somewhere. And then if you give to Stronger Man Nation, which would be amazing, it should be over and above. That's how we do it.
Right.
We believe that the church is the hope of the world, not Hope International.
Right.
We believe that the church is the hope of the world, not compassion.
Right.
And so we give. It's like it's also a watering principle. It's like God calls Christians to water the ground where they're at, and with the cropping up of international missions and the internet, too many Christians are trying to water grass where they're not living. It's like if every Christian just said, I'm gonna keep the grass where I live green, the world would instantly be getting greener.
Right.
But it's Christians who are like, I'm going to give over here, and then they don't even give 10%. But it makes them feel like they're really doing something heroic.
Right.
By feeding a kid in Africa somewhere with a goat. I'm not against that at all.
Right.
But you know what I mean? But you put up a picture of a poor kid, and oh boy, here come the pocketbooks. And oftentimes it's from people who aren't giving or tithing to their local church. So there's spiritual starvation happening in their own town. To provide some physical food for someone in a different part of the country. It's you know, it's is it Ordo Amoris, ordered love. The Christians understand rightly ordered love. You know, I don't love my kids more than my wife. I don't love my neighbors more than my kids. I don't love Idaho more than I love Washington. And I don't love Canada more than I love my country.
Like
that's how it works. And so like the Christian understands that, and the Christian understands from the teaching of Scripture that when I love things in rightly ordered love, when I love things in the right order, when I love my Savior more than my wife, and my wife more than my kids more than the neighbors. And when I have those levels in place, I end up being the best lover to everyone around me, and everything starts to flourish.
Yeah.
So the person who's saying, "Hey, can I not give to my local church? Just give to nonprofit?" I'm like, you can totally give to nonprofit, but don't go around the local church.
Right.
The local church is the hope of the world,
That's
and
right.
nonprofits can help out. And so water the grass where you're at.
Yeah.
Water the grass where you're at, and watch the whole world get greener.
Yeah.
That's good.
I don't like the word greener. Watch the whole world get better. Get more flourisher.
Green's a good color.
Flourishing.
Greener's got such horrible
It's
connotations
springtime.
these days. Yeah, we're not. So,
Yeah.
anything to add to that, Jeff? Because you
just-
guys,
yeah,
because
I
your
mean-
brother, I mean, boy, oh boy, he's out there making it happen for lots of organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I mean,
If you're out there listening somewhere, Dave.
yeah, Dave.
Yeah.
Dave does give well to his local church.
Yep.
And has actually taught me that. But I mean, it's again just really practical, and that is, I think you have a responsibility to provide for those who are feeding you. And
Yeah.
if you're being
Yes.
fed at your church
Yeah.
in any manner, then you ought to definitely support the place where you're being fed.
That's right.
And hopefully
Right.
you're being fed in your local church that you go to.
Yep.
Yep.
Secondly, I would say if you have any level of dissatisfaction with your church, or you hope your church can be more, or you hope your pastor's less tired, well, you're not going to do any good by like starving them financially.
Right.
That's good.
At our businesses, we always try to provide for our employees as much as we can, because I don't like employees who can't pay their mortgage,
Yeah.
who are stressed out and tired and come to work exhausted because they can't pay their bills.
Yep.
That doesn't make a good employee for me.
Yep.
Your pastor should be warm and well fed.
Amen.
And like you want your pastor to like be less stressed and have more energy to swing for the fences for the
That's
kingdom,
right.
we'll feed him.
That's right.
And so that's on the responsibility of the congregation to provide for your pastor where you're at.
Yep.
And then you'll be blessed by that, because your church should, if it's got financial support, it's going to be a good thing for you.
That's right.
Yep.
So I would say it's your responsibility to provide for where you're being fed, but it's also in a way an act of selfishness, because if you're putting money into where you are, that should help things get better and
Amen.
help your pastor
Yep.
be in a better place.
Yep.
That's good.
So-
That's a good word.
Yep.
So a lot of people listening from out of the area, all over the country, like
Yeah.
18 countries. So the encouragement is give first. Your 10% tithe should go to your local church if possible.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a local church, maybe we have folks email us who like they don't have a church in their town.
Right.
And so they give to ministries that feed them.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. I mean, that's trying to honor the principle, I think.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
But if you have a local church you're in, be fully vested there.
Yeah, and I think you need to. I think you need to be involved enough in your church and intimately know the leadership of your church well enough, if you can, that you understand what are the objectives and dreams of the leadership team at your church, because they may be holding things back that they're unable to like unveil to the church, and we're unable to get done. Before you go passing your dollars off to a parachurch ministry, you should probably have a conversation with your pastor and be like, hey, do you have any dreams or visions that we haven't been able to fund,
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
haven't been able to afford? Because if so, you
good,
might
Jeff.
want to keep your dollars there, because they may
Yeah.
have dreams and visions you don't even know about.
That's good.
Yeah.
And
That's
so-
good, man.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
You've done that with us many times. And I would say, to add to that pastorally, it's the job of the pastor to stay $5 or $10 million bucks in front of the church,
Yep.
depending on the size.
Yeah.
Right. And so for some, that might mean if you're a smaller church, you need to stay $500 to $1,000 to $1 million ahead of your church. But resources follow vision, and you can't outgive the vision of God. And
Yep.
God
Yeah.
owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. These are all metaphors to say
Yeah.
God will resource and fund the dreams He gives you.
Yep.
And so a part of the job of the pastor, and we've talked about this, is I love coming away from times with you, because you have such remarkable vision for your businesses. You're a hard worker, up early, up
Right.
late. I mean, an entrepreneur, business owner, it's a 7-day-a-week deal, right? It's a dairy farm kind of thing. But what the reason, and this is a whole nother podcast, maybe we're not being succinct here. I need to stop. But partnering up the kingdom, the churchman with the businessman, is when the kingdom of God grows. When the pastor of a local church and a business leader of local businesses get their heart on the same page, the kingdom of God explodes. And what I tell pastors is, it's your obligation to have more vision for the kingdom than the business owners in your church have for their business.
Yeah, that's good.
Because if they come to your church and they sit under your preaching and they hear your vision for the community and they intuitively sense that they have more drive for their business,
Yeah.
they have more vision for their product or their company than you have for the kingdom of God, that will not draw out of them excitement
Right.
to give.
Yeah.
And so honestly, the frank fact of the matter is we got a lot of pastors in pulpits and churches who are pastoring businessmen who have more juice for the marketplace than those pastors have for the kingdom.
That's a good word.
And that's what I want to say, brother, get your heart into heaven. Get your heart before the throne of God. Like, get a dream for how God might, like I tell our church all the time, we are a small church in a small backwater, blue-collar, rural, agricultural town. Yeah. And I'm asking that God would allow us to make a disproportional impact on the world given our size and location.
Yeah.
Every pastor should be asking God for that.
Yeah.
Give me a dream that makes me uncomfortable. Because, Pastor, I think when you're living into a dream that makes you uncomfortable, it makes your people excited. They're like, oh, here we go. And we've never laid before a vision. We've never laid before our people a vision that any of us thought we could do on our own.
Yeah.
You need to be painting a vision for your people that could only be accomplished by the collective work of those God has called to that local church and a heavenly provision from God himself.
Yeah.
And God will never call you to work that he will not provide provision for. Yeah. And so we always say we have everything we need to get everything done that God's asking us to do. Yeah. Sadly, it's oftentimes much more than we're currently reaching for.
Yeah.
You could do so much more if you just engage the lever, you know? So
that's a good word.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, very good.
What was that? Question 3 or number 2,
going.
whatever it is. Here we go.
2 or 3.
Yeah, we've kind of slowed down. We lost a little momentum.
Yep.
Okay.
We're doing fine.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay.
Fellas, let's talk about your wardrobe. Stop wearing t-shirts of companies that hate your values. Get gear that matches your values and your chiseled features. That's why we're excited to introduce the Stronger Man Nation shop. We're making shirts built for legends, premium fit, quality print, and a masculine message. So check out our latest line. It's going to be epic and won't last long. We can only make a few of each, and then it's gone. So head over to shop at strongermannation.com or hit the link in the description and join the few, join the proud, join Stronger Man Nation.
Husband says, this is a question, husband says, tithing is only for the Old Testament. The New Testament calls for giving, but not tithing. What are your thoughts?
Get a new husband. I'm kidding. I do not mean that. No. Well, a lot of pastoral thoughts. You can jump in with practical stuff. I would tend not to want to argue theologically with this guy because he's not well intended.
Right.
And so, like, don't argue with fools. Right. Don't throw your pearls before swine.
Yep.
So we could go tit for tat, verse for verse, but my guess is this guy is only a biblical scholar when it comes to money. And so he's got a few Old Testament obscure verses he's pulled out, and he knows just enough about Old Covenant and New Covenant to be dangerous and excuse his sin.
Yeah.
Like, let's not pretend this guy's a Rhodes Scholar here and understands biblical theology, historical theology, systematic theology, and has done a serious survey of both Old and New Testament to understand whether he's an open field guy, a brick wall guy, or a picket fence guy.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I don't even know, I don't even take this question seriously.
Yeah.
Because the word tithe is in the New Testament. Jesus talks about it where he rebukes the Pharisees not for tithing, but for thinking that Christianity is reduced to tithe.
Yeah.
And so when Jesus says, he doesn't say, you don't need to tithe, you need to do justice. He says, hey, keep tithing, and you should be doing justice.
Right.
You should be doing the mercy thing. And so the point is, Christianity isn't, while Christianity is more than the tithe, Christianity is certainly not less than the tithe. And if you want to start getting finicky and technical on the law and grace, the law was put in place to rein in the heart and did a terrible job. And then God pours out his grace, meaning grace should secure more from us as Christians, not less. Yeah. If the law was securing at least 30% in a theocracy in Israel, 10% tithe to the Levites, 10% tithe to the king, 10% tithe to the people, almost 30% in giving that the law required to support a theocracy. And then you realize, you know what, the law can't control the heart, we need grace. If we're living under the age of grace, it's not that we will give less, it's that we will give more.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And so I just hear that and I go, I'm sorry your husband uses Bible verses to excuse his sin. Yeah. But as your helper, you should keep praying for him and keep asking him questions until the Holy Spirit hopefully pricks his heart and maybe hears this. I mean, who wants to be married to the guy who makes excuses to do bottom shelf, lowest common denominator Christianity? Right. Who wants to be married to that guy? Yeah. Yep. I use obscure Old Testament Bible verses to excuse my lack of faith and the sin of greed, and I do it all with the air of spirituality. bro, you are a card-carrying Pharisee.
Yeah.
And it's sad that you make your wife follow that.
Yeah.
She's a better man than you.
Mm-hmm.
She's a better Christian than you. You should listen to her. She's your helper. She's trying to help pull your heart out of hell.
Yeah.
It's good.
That's what I would say.
It's good. And you said it. It was really good.
Anything to add to that?
Probably nothing additive.
Okay.
I mean, I would say, the first thing that hit me is like, not trying to be crass to the question asker, but like, what's your point? I don't understand.
Yeah.
I guess
That's
the
good.
question sort of is like,
That's
well, what do
fair.
you mean? Like, are
Yeah.
you trying to give the label giving? Are you trying to say the label giving can be less than 10%? So like, I don't want to do tithe because that's 10%. I
Right.
want to give. So I'm assuming you want to give less. So you're trying to
Right.
give the
Yes.
label of giving is like, well, giving can be 5%. So
Right.
you're just like, what are you asking this for? What's
Right.
the point? I mean, you've already set the question up in a way that sort of reveals your heart. It's like you're just looking for a way to give less, I'm assuming. Because I'm doubting you're arguing for giving more.
Yeah.
Right, right,
I mean,
right,
I'm guessing
right.
by the nature of
Right.
the question.
Right,
You're
right.
not trying to find a way to give
Yeah.
more.
No one ever
No,
gets
he's-
in a Bible argument with me to
give more.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Right. So there's just a fundamental heart attitude, heart
That's right.
issue there
Yeah.
That's right.
that's underlying the question that immediately sort of disqualifies the question asker,
Yeah.
not the lady, but the issue with
Yeah.
potentially with the husband. So
Yep.
I'm just like, what's your point?
Yep.
Again, why do you need a verse to give anyway?
That's
So-
right.
Right.
And honestly, I think that's so well said, Jeff. And I don't take any man seriously who calls himself a Christian and doesn't tithe.
Yeah.
I just don't. You're a joke. You're a joke. You could figure out how to live on 90% of your income. If I told you, if you invest this 10% in Bitcoin, I guarantee you'll be a billionaire in 5 years. Every man would find that 10%.
Yep.
Yep.
Which means
Every time.
they've just said that's where their treasure is. If I knew I could make $1 billion and make myself richer, I would do this investment. But because it's for the church, I don't think I want to. So I'm going to make excuses now to make myself feel better about justifying
Yep.
my lack of faith. Here's the thing: when we give first fruit giving off the top, it requires faith.
Right.
So, bro, what you don't need is more Bible verses. What you need is more faith.
Yep.
Yep.
Because you're demonstrating by your stupid little arguments that you don't have faith in
Yeah.
God to provide for your needs with 90%.
Yeah.
You should read the Sermon on the Mount.
Yep.
You know,
That's
Yeah.
good.
so
That's
all right,
good.
Next
Next
question.
one.
We're rolling. What
What-
question was that? 5,
4 or 5.
4,
I think it was
5?
four.
You
We're
keep
up
track here?
That was 4.
We're
Is that-
moving.
let's call it question 10. We're flying.
Okay. What
not
do I
question 10.
do if we are married and we disagree on giving, on the amount to be given specifically?
Well, that's kind of the same question, isn't it? A little bit. How's it different?
No, this one, the former question was talking about tithing as
Okay.
being the
Versus
lid.
giving.
And this
Okay.
one is saying they're in disagreement about what to give.
Okay. Well, I
Yeah.
would go about it a couple different ways. If the disagreement is one spouse wants to tithe
Right.
and the other doesn't, that's an obedience issue. And
Right.
so if it's the man who doesn't want to tithe, he needs to repent
Yeah.
because he's not leading his home into righteousness, and he needs to listen to the helper God gave him
Yep.
in order to get his heart into the kingdom. If it's the wife who doesn't want to give, we run into this a lot too, and the husband wants to. Oftentimes, the husband is a higher risk taker,
Right.
and
Yep.
and he's like, "We'll be good," and she's like, "No." I mean, Sharon and I worked through this early on in our marriage. Not that Sharon ever said we shouldn't tithe, but when we looked at our finances, she would get nervous because she came from a home that didn't have much.
Yeah.
And so she, was like, hey, I want to be careful here that we don't give the farm away and make sure. And so we had to work through that. And so as a husband, I had to walk her through what our philosophy of giving was going to be and what our philosophy of tithing was going to be. This thing's driving me nuts. I just tightened it down. And so in doing that, I'm discipling my wife out of fear into health, right? And so if it's a husband who's dragging his feet, repent, listen to your helper. If it's the wife who's dragging your feet, hey, husbands, disciple her up. And it may be that she has fear because you've been irresponsible with your money,
Yep.
or you don't communicate with her about your money, or she doesn't know what's going on. So there's some sort of fear in her heart that you need to figure out where it's coming from, and then it's your job as her protector to figure it out and then provide comfort and assurance. So her misplaced, or her maybe her rightly placed fear,
Yeah.
or her misplaced fear. If it's rightly placed fear, fix the cause of the fear.
Yeah.
If it's misplaced fear, correct the wrong thinking, and then because your marriage will never be healthy if you let your wife's fear and anxiety be a boat anchor to you obeying Jesus. So you need to disciple her into obedience, and part of it might be, babe, you just need to trust me.
Yeah.
God's called me to lead, and we're not going to disobey him. Now, if both spouses have an agreement to disobey Jesus, you need to repent of your unholy alliance and your unholy agreement, and you need to break that agreement, and you need to make a new one that we will this household will serve the Lord. Now, so that's one section. The other section is, let's say you're giving 10% faithfully, and now your church has the opportunity, like we do with campaigns, to give over and above tithes and offerings.
Right.
I talked with a pastor today on the phone. He's in the middle of a campaign at his church. And he's like, I want to give this much. My wife wants to give this much. He wants to give more. She wants to give less. And it's not a sin thing. They're just trying to figure out how to do it. The number she wants to give, they know they can do. The number he wants to give, it'd have to rain a little bit for them to make it. He'd have to go out and get a few side gigs, and so that, I'm like, that's a great discussion that you should talk through with. And he was calling, and I was like, bro, that's a wisdom call. I mean, I don't want to talk any man out of giving more, and you shouldn't give away in a way that makes your wife unnecessarily anxious. So we've flushed our savings to zero multiple times at Grace City Church. And it's like, here we go. And fundamental conviction as the lead pastor, I'm the first one over the wall, that we should give first, most, and lead by example so I can have integrity in the pulpit. And so we have flushed our bank account to zero multiple times. And I'm just telling you, friends, it just keeps filling up. I mean, you cannot outgive the grace of God. That's to your point earlier. You scatter the seed, God will give you more seed. And so if you're not on the same page about what to give in an offering sense, there's a little more room for wisdom there. And man, listen to your wife. And what my wife and I have done is we'll go away and pray about it. This is like campaign giving. This is offerings giving. This isn't tithe. Tithe is fixed. We'll come back and we have a pre-agreement that we'll go with a higher number.
That's right.
And so we sometimes it's her, and I'll be like, honey, and okay, here we go. Sometimes it's me. As we've gotten older and we've included some of our business side businesses with friends in it, Sharon isn't involved in that at all. And so I'll bring back, hey, here's the plan with my buddies. We got a little side business going here. Here's the sales we want to make. Here's the levers we want to pull. If all these things happen in the Lord's hands, we could give X. And she's like, sweet, because we don't see them anyways. In a couple of businesses we've started with buddies, it's all for the sake of building the kingdom. We don't take any money from it anyways. So that's how we get there. I don't know, Jeff.
I would say, I mean, I know the question's sort of like if spouses can't quite agree, but I would say, from the man's perspective, I have seen similar to what you just said, where sometimes a woman has a little more trepidation about it. And I think sometimes they're not the breadwinners. They don't know the security of your job. How are we going to make it? What if you lose your job? And the man just seems to be a little more intimate with the finances at times, or at least where the money's coming from. And so I think oftentimes men can be sort of flippant or about their home budget and about the nature of their finances. And I think sometimes women can feel in the dark. And so oftentimes it's a shortcoming of a man to communicate well with his wife about the status of their finances, about the ability to make these pledges to the church. And a lot of times it's just, I'm an Excel guy. I love Excel. And I'll just sit Becky down in front of it and be like, hey, babe, here's what we make. Here's our bills. And here's what I'm proposing we give. And sometimes it goes from, every time it goes from fear to understanding. And it's like, yeah, you're right. We can totally do that. And secondly, I would say this can be bidirectional between the wife and the spouse, or and the husband and the husband and the wife. And that is, I think you can find a place of agreement in that. Becky and I always say that a good place to start with your giving is an intersection of faith and wisdom.
There you go. Okay? That's good.
And right there in that middle. So you can argue to the husband who might have a problem with that number, be like, well, do we find wisdom in this number? Yes. But I want to exercise more faith. Great. Let's meet right there where wisdom and faith intersect. It's a little bit stretchy, but it's also not like we're trying to we got $10 in the bank account, we're going to write a check for $1 million. That's stupid. God's not going to honor that. That ignores the wisdom piece. So if you can come together in a place of wisdom, where wisdom and faith intersect, you can oftentimes make both people happy. I feel like we're being wise, and I feel like we're stretching a little.
That's good.
And so you can maybe get off the blocks if you find that number.
That's super good. Because what we're not encouraging is for couples to not be in unity. I mean, part of the beauty of money is that it forces you to have conversations to get on the same page. And so don't skip that process. Honey, just you'll get over it. No, dude, do your homework. Pull out the spreadsheet. Comfort her fears. Massage her fears. Answer her questions. And then when I've done that, I mean, Sharon's typically like, oh, well, and then her number goes higher. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well,
I didn't know you were getting that big
hold
bonus
on.
in quarter two. Like, well, yeah, we are. Like,
Yep.
oh, we can give that,
Yep, totally. That's good. Great question.
Good stuff, guys. Okay, this is an easy one.
All right.
The next one's great. We're paying $20,000 a year for our daughters to attend private Christian school. Is this tithing?
No.
No.
It's like, why would they think that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like I go to Starbucks every day,
Yep.
and the teller is a Christian.
Yeah.
Is this tithing?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No. Is that university the church? Is Starbucks the church? I don't get it.
Yep.
There's a local guy who owns a burger joint, and we make a point to eat there every day.
Mm-hmm.
Is that tithing? What? It's
Yeah.
not the church.
Yeah.
It's not the church.
You're paying for a service.
You're paying for a service.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. So that's my short
Yeah,
answer.
it sounds like, I don't wouldn't want to be offensive to the question asker, but it sounds like maybe an immature Christian or someone who's new to the Christian circle
Yeah.
or in some level of immaturity of understanding, like, well, I guess I feel like I'm giving to some sort of pseudo-religious organization,
Right.
so I'm
Right.
somehow funding God's work here.
Right.
So I sort of understand the confusion, but just like we've said in past questions, like, can I give of my time? No, the church needs
Right.
needs resources. It needs money. Giving to your
Right.
kids a school is not a way of funding Jesus's church.
Yeah.
And
That's
right.
So no.
Yep.
Yep.
Great.
And fundamentally, it's to the point Kyle made. It's you're paying for a service.
That's right.
Right.
Like, that's completely different than.
Yeah. The relationship is completely different than the church.
Yeah.
That's exactly
point.
right. You want to speak to that at all?
Yeah. It's
Because we have that
we're
dynamic
making-
at Grace City. We have
That's right.
we have Grace City Church where you just
Yep.
give first fruit tithes.
Yep.
We have Garden City Academy, a K through 12 Christian school, and we have Vector Institute, a 2-year Associate of Arts college situation. And so we told people, like, if you send your kids to Garden City Academy, that's not tithing.
Yeah.
That's paying for a service. Oh, by the way, which we're charging you half of what it actually costs.
Right.
And
Right.
And so it's like you're getting twice as much of what you're actually paying for.
Right.
So you're getting a whopping deal. That's not tithing.
Yeah.
That's buying the best deal in town.
Yeah. Yeah. It's in a private school. It's a contractual arrangement.
Yeah.
You're paying for a service. I give you this money. You give me this service or
Yes.
this product or this outcome.
Yes.
Right. In the church, it's an invitation to be obedient.
Yeah.
Right.
It's good.
To
That's
give.
good.
That's
and
good.
so they're
Really good.
fundamentally very different.
Yep.
Fundamentally very, very different.
Yep.
One's paying for a service. The other one is an invitation to walk in obedience.
That's good.
When we're talking about tithing and giving.
That's good,
Yeah,
man.
that's
Super
really
good.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Momentum. We're rolling.
Yeah, we are. Should we still tithe if we are in consumer debt? Not including mortgage, but they've got consumer debt. Think cars, car loans, credit cards. They've been given the advice not to tithe while in debt because the debt is not their money.
It's terrible advice. It's terrible advice.
Agreed.
I've sinned,
Right.
and now I'm in a hard place. How should I get out of it? Well, you should keep sinning.
Right.
That makes no sense.
Right.
If the only way you've gotten into consumer debt that's burying you is through mismanaging your finances and probably the sin of greed, materialism.
That's right.
So getting out of the sin of greed, materialism, to get out of that, you repent and you start obeying Jesus. I have never seen someone, I got to think about this. I have never seen someone who is in debt say, I'm going to tithe as soon as I get out of debt, get out of debt. It's both a spiritual reality and a physical one.
That's right.
The spiritual reality is God's blessing is going to be in your finances and you're always going to be in a hole. The physical reality is you're not fundamentally training your heart to love the kingdom over material possessions, which means you'll always be getting into debt.
Yep.
Because you haven't addressed the fundamental issue that got you into the hole in the first place.
Yep.
And so I would say if you're in debt, the first thing you have to do is start tithing.
Yep.
And I have seen hundreds,
Right.
and this is an exaggeration. We
Yep.
did this at our church like probably 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And there were a lot of people in debt. And we said, no, you start tithing.
Yeah.
And then we watched hundreds of people get out of consumer debt because, one, the supernatural principles was in play.
Yep.
God was blessing their finances.
Yep.
And they fundamentally changed the orientation of their heart in the physical realm
Right.
to love the kingdom over possessions.
Yep.
So now they're actually managing their finances better.
Yep.
So I'm telling you, if you're in consumer debt, You will not get out of it unless you first start obeying Jesus with the tithe.
Yep.
Terrible advice
Yep.
to not start tithing. It's like you're robbing God
Yeah.
Right.
in the name of paying off man.
Right.
It makes no sense biblically and practically.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that?
I would just double down on what you just said, which is 2 sins don't make no sin or make the situation better.
That's good.
That doesn't help the situation.
Yeah.
And you chances are, if you are in consumer debt, the reality is if you don't start giving and reorienting your heart, you think your debt's high now, you'll probably be in more debt next year.
That's right.
Because you haven't reoriented your heart. And chances are you're still going to continue to fall to temptation. You're going to still have a lack of contentment that has not been put out or satisfied by the real antidote for contentment, which is generosity.
Yep.
Becky and I were in the same, and to your point, you're bypassing the spiritual blessing of potentially getting out of this debt by giving first fruits and letting the Lord help you walk out of that. Becky and I, in our first year of marriage, we were not saved. We had like $42,000 on credit cards. And
Wow. Really?
Wow.
Yeah, we were, I mean, you know our story.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's a lot of credit card debt, bro.
That is tell me about it.
Can I ask what like just guns and cars and
Everything you can imagine.
okay.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Wow.
Dinners, toys, all the stuff.
All the stuff.
All the crap that you try to fill your heart with when you're not saved.
Yep.
And we did all that in spades. We did a really good job of it. And got racked up on credit cards. And when Becky and I got saved, we decided, for whatever reason, due to this thankfulness thing that we've talked about, due to our thankfulness for Jesus saving us, we just decided giving was like a big deal for us. And we were like, I want to give back to the church. I want to give back to Jesus.
Yeah.
We started, and Becky also simultaneously decided to stay home. And so our income was cut in half.
Wow.
But then we decided we were just going to start giving radically.
Yeah.
It just was, we felt led to do that.
Yeah.
3 weeks later,
Yeah.
our debt was gone.
Dude.
What?
That's incredible.
Jesus, I won't go into detail on the story, but God landed $50,000 on us out of the blue.
Wow.
And we
Oh
paid
my
that debt
goodness.
off.
Wow.
And then we were just like,
Unbelievable.
it was just like God's way of affirming,
That's right.
give to me first,
That's right.
and I will take care of you.
Yep.
That's right. I've
And
never
so-
heard that story.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Yep.
Dude.
3 weeks later.
So,
Dude,
so
people
you
have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The blessing waiting on the other side of simple obedience.
Right.
That requires faith.
Yep.
Probably more faith than any other decision they make.
Yep.
Yeah.
And God's like, I have yet to fail
Yeah.
Yeah.
a child of mine who steps out in faith and trusts me.
Yeah.
Because that's the one thing he says, test me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we were
And he's
right
never
in
failed
this,
the test.
We were right in this question asker's wheelhouse.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
it was almost irresponsible for us to give that money to the church and not pay off our debt with it.
Yep.
Like we probably should have been, the world would say, pay your debt.
Yep.
And it was like, well, we're going to steer it to the church. We're going to steer it
Yep.
to Jesus. And he honored that.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Incredible.
One more thing to add. You have the spiritual blessing that comes, as you were just describing there, Jeff. He who sows sparingly reaps sparingly. He who sows generously reaps generously. But then also, I've sat down with hundreds of people over 20 plus years
As an
in
accountant.
financial services.
Professional accountant.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what I know about people who are they just have consumer debt just heaped on them, right? Is they have never had the discipline of giving in their life. And then the first thing I counsel them to is start honoring the Lord with their first fruits and start tithing, start giving. And so there's, the spiritual, heavenly kind of math that you just described, where the Lord just continues to pour out blessing, right?
Yep.
And then there's also just the very real spiritual discipline that comes when you start paying attention to your money. And what tithing does, what honoring the Lord with your first fruits does, is you'll have more intentional conversations. If you're married, you'll have more intentional conversations with your spouse. If you're single, you'd have more intentional conversations with your accountability.
Yep.
And you start paying more attention to your dollars because you are committed to honoring the Lord with your first fruits. And so there's a very practical reality that comes out of it where you start paying better attention.
That's right.
And that's what honoring the Lord with your first fruits, what tithing does.
Yep.
Is especially if you're racked with consumer debt, you start paying better attention so that you don't keep making the same mistakes while still being a good steward with what you got and asking the Lord to bless you with more and above of what you've already gotten.
That's good.
So
That's good,
Really
man.
good.
okay. Is it okay to give part of your tithes to a local church member? So not to the church, but to a member in that church.
I mean, this some of the hairs that get split
Yeah.
with these questions, sometimes I want to be careful how I answer them because I don't want to be flippant. If it's someone who's genuinely wrestling, you know what I mean? Oh, that's great. But if it's someone who's just like trying to excuse himself out of, I'm like, come on. But I would say that's not a healthy practice to get into. We give 10% and more off the top as first fruit to the church.
Right.
We want, because the person you're giving to they're not the organization of the church. They may be a member of the church, but they're probably not going to keep the church strong. Like you're giving to keep the church strong. And then the church should have mercy funds and those kind of things. And so it's like, if the church is strong as a local community of faith, as an organization, they can help keep those who need the funds in the church cared for. Now, I say that, and I will say a lot of financial needs get met at Grace City Church that don't run through the organization of the church, which I love. People are living in city groups, and I mean, I could name names of people who are godly people. They're good city group leaders. They give generously, faithfully, sacrificially, proportionately, and consistently, which is the mark of faithful giving. Proportionate to your income as a percentage. First it off the top, sacrificially, joyfully, all the things. They're giving, and a need will come up in their city group, and they just take care of it. I mean, it's not like you got to turn in a slip to the business of the church to, hey, this person needs some gas money, and I mean, I give 10%. It's your job. It's like, no, it's like that kind of organic, led by the Spirit stuff happens all the time. But if the only giving you do is quote unquote led by the Spirit on a need based thing, I call them sugar givers. You know, you're not giving. So the analogy is, none of us think we eat that much sugar until you actually track it for a week. Like I did with an app one time. Huge mistake. Oh my gosh, I'm consuming so much sugar every day. I had no idea. My 3 glasses of Arnold Palmer a night, 100 grams of sugar. What? I don't do cereal. I don't do candy. I don't do whatever. But I want a couple glasses of Arnold Palmer every night, and it's racking up the sugar. I'll probably die of cancer before I'm 46. So you don't think you're eating sugar until you start tracking how much sugar you're eating, and then you realize you're eating way more than you think. The same as giving. You probably think you're giving way more than you are. If you are an impulse giver, a by the Spirit giver. You should track what you're giving. And what I found, almost to the man, those who don't give consistently are giving way less than they think they're giving. So if you don't track your sugar, you're always going to eat more than you think. And if you don't track your giving, you're always going to give less than you think. The converse is true on those who give consistently, but don't ever like think about it in terms of like, we give 10% off the top. Do that for a year or 5 years, and then go back and add up how much you've given. It's crazy. It's never 10%. It's like, how did this happen? How did we give this much? And how do we still have some in our bank account? It is almost spooky. It's like, it's like, how did that happen? And I have heard that testimony hundreds of times. I mean, everyone's like, you had that. I know, it's like crazy. It's like we all have our own little personal oil jar, the Old Testament, you know, she just kept pouring it out, it kept filling up. And so, no, like obey Jesus. What a tithe is 10%. I think that doesn't include random people on the street. That doesn't include a needy member in your church. It doesn't include nonprofits like Stronger Man Nation. It's the church. And then over and above, I mean, Dave and Mary Hale, I'll throw Dave under the bus here. He'll be okay with it. He and Mary give faithfully. And then they had a ministry budget. There was another, 5%, something like that. And they would just put money there. And so they're given, tithing, faithfully. And then they have a second budget, they call their ministry budget. And then I'll get emotional. They paid for Ella Mae's physical therapy when she was a kid. And we didn't have the money for that. We were broke. And they were like, hey, how's things going with Ella Mae? And Ella Mae, my daughter, born with spina bifida, needed physical therapy, needed occupational therapy. And so they paid for my daughter to get physical therapy out of their ministry budget. That was separate than their tithing budget, right? And I'm telling you, if they wouldn't have had the ministry budget and just counted that as tithe, they probably wouldn't have had either. But because they were faithful to tithe, and so, I mean, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but Dave and Mary give way above and beyond a tithe. They're just generous people.
Yes.
And they give it to the church. And then have with that ministry a line item. They would buy cars for people.
Yeah.
They would buy groceries for people. They would pay for their pastor's daughter's physical therapy.
Right.
They would do all sorts of things, and that was all over and above giving faithfully to their local church.
Yeah.
And to Jeff's point earlier, it doesn't help Dave Hale if he buys somebody a car but starves his pastor and now his church sucks.
Yeah.
Right.
Keep your
Right.
pastor strong, keep your church strong, so you can have a place to stay spiritually strong, so you can be out there buying people's groceries with over and above giving.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that?
Super quick, I'll just condense that in that I would just say that maybe and then there's no verse for this, but I would categorize the two different types of giving. The one is she's talking about a tithe. The second kind of giving I would label as generosity, and they're two different things.
Yes.
And so the tithe is absolutely, you should go to the church, you should give your church, you should keep the lights on at your church. Generosity starts when it's above and beyond your tithe.
That's
and
right.
if you have a heart for someone that has a cancer diagnosis or someone who's needy, a single mom in your church, I would label that then as you get into the category of generosity.
Yep.
But they're two different things, and they're mutually exclusive, literally.
Yes.
That you need to do your tithe to the church.
Yep.
Satisfy that in whatever way you feel good about between you and Jesus.
Yep.
And then generosity starts with looking around and seeing like, who can I help with extra money that's going to be above that 10%.
Yep.
So two different categories.
That's good.
Yep. That's
And
good,
you can do both to the church.
Yeah,
You can tithe
yes.
and be generous to your
Yes.
church, like
And-
you and Becky have done, and other things as
Yep.
well. And so it's like this doesn't get into this as well, but like one of the convictions I have is the principle of concentration. Like I don't want to give. And again, this is a wisdom. So this is not a Bible thing. So someone can disagree with me or practice differently and be totally fine.
Right.
But
Right.
just if it's a practical help, I've always had the conviction I don't want to be a non-difference making giver to 50 organizations. I want to be a difference making giver to one or two organizations I believe in.
Yes.
And that's a philosophical conviction of Sharon and I.
Yeah.
So I can't go do the background checks on 50 different ministries and how they handle the giving and what percentage actually goes to the front line versus just ministry overhead, blah blah blah. And I'm not present in where a lot of these ministries are. I'm seeing firsthand what Grace City's doing.
Yeah.
I'm seeing firsthand what Strong in My Nation is doing, and so that we're all in on that, because we want to be the kind of givers that if we stopped giving, Grace City Church would feel it. It would hurt.
Right.
And by God's grace, we're getting to do that. And same with Jeff Becky. And so it's and other many people in our church. And so it's like I want to be a difference making giver in one or two organizations, not a non-difference making giver in 50. I don't even know that well.
Right.
And that's just a personal philosophical conviction.
Yep.
If you're sprinkling out over 15 or 20, that's awesome. Nothing
Yep.
wrong with that at all.
Yep.
But that's just a little personal nugget to throw in there. I want to make the difference in a ministry that's going to bless my family, bless the town I live in. I want a strong church. If you're a businessman or you work at McDonald's or you're a cop in this town or whatever town you're listening in right now, you want a strong church in that town, right?
Yeah.
You want a strong gospel presence. You want a place that unbelievers could go and find Jesus and hear the gospel and be discipled. Man, keep your church strong.
Yeah.
Yep.
Keep your church strong.
Yep.
Yeah.
How about
All right,
one
next
more?
question. Yeah.
Let's do one more here. What if I don't think the church handles the finances well? Should I still give?
Well, different answers for that. My first answer is, and this might be controversial, but it's not your responsibility to police the church. It's your responsibility to obey Jesus and give. Mm-hmm. And so my first answer is, and I said this to our church on Sunday.
Yeah.
For those of you that struggle with giving or aren't giving,
Right.
you shouldn't care if you wrote a check to the church, Kyle took it out of the box, went around the corner and burned it to the ground, lit it on fire, because your issue is obedience to God.
Yeah.
Right. Once you've obeyed God, man, it's like, hey, that's my end of the deal. And then it's the church's responsibility to be faithful with that. So that's the first answer I'd give.
Yeah.
The second answer I would give is if you're a high net worth individual, you should think carefully where you give your resources, because you could hurt some organizations. They don't have the vision for it or the structure to receive it, and you could artificially keep alive some organizations that should die.
Yeah.
Now, I'm just speaking of high net worth individuals.
Yeah.
Furthermore, like I know some guys who are like, if I tithe in my church, it'd crush them,
Right.
because like their tithe is more than the church's budget. That's not an illegitimate problem.
Right.
But that's not most people's problem.
Yeah.
There would be a special offline conversation to have with that guy, get him connected with a guy like Jeff or someone else in his shoes to help him think that through. But by and large, the vast majority of Christians should give faithfully to their local church with no strings attached.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes when people are like, well, I demand to see the financials and a P&L and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I don't know if that jives with me. You know what I mean? It's like, yes, you should be responsible. And yes, there's a measure of transparency that churches, can have to just be, I mean, but like, my gosh, you can't get away with much with regulations these days. And so it's like, if you have a philosophical difference with how the church, it's like, for instance, we have people who have left the church because we don't fund overseas missions.
Right.
Their big thing is overseas missions. A missionary in Uganda who's wearing funny clothes and eating bugs. It's like I want to support them, and we're like, hey, that's awesome. We're not saying you shouldn't. We don't feel called to do that.
Right.
And they're like, well, I'm going to take my tithe money and go somewhere else. So it's like, well, why don't you tithe to your local church and then you give generously to that organization? Well, I want you to do it. Well, the heart posture says I'm going to give and then steer the church with my giving. You don't want those people in your church. That's a hard issue. And if you're giving to steer a church, that's dangerous.
Right.
I mean, who's being responsible with their finances, the church or you?
Right.
And so oftentimes when someone says, I don't give to my local church, I don't want to give because they're being irresponsible with their finances, I'm like, said from the person who's being irresponsible with their finances?
Right.
Because you're not giving, you're not tithing. And so, it's kind of like the pot calling the kettle black there. So if you know of a church where the pastor's, driving a diamond-studded $1 million Ferrari and he's known to be a TV charlatan, there are not many out there. But if he's one in a million who is, well, come on, exercise a little common sense. You know what I mean? But by and large, most churches are handling their money faithfully. They don't have much of it. And some churches, you might have a philosophical difference. That's fine. Then you should find a church that you philosophically align with and fund them aggressively. That's what I'd say. What would you say to that as a parishioner?
I'd say the first thing that comes to mind is...
Well, what's the question again? I feel like I got off a little bit. The question is...
What if I don't think the church handles the finances well? Should I still give?
There you go.
There you go. I guess we'll have to see if this hits the question asker or not. But what comes to mind, though, is I would first examine my heart in thinking that I might have a pride issue or a feeling like I need to control what's going on at the church. And I might feel like I can do better. I know better than them. And you might not. And so there may be pride welling up in you and a sense of a desire to control the outcome of everything, which is not an uncommon emotion for all of us. And so it may not be that they're not actually stewarding the money or doing a bad job with it. You might just not agree with what they're doing, but that doesn't make it wrong. And then that goes into, do I trust my leadership? Are we funding, missionaries in Uganda, or are we, building a new extension to the building so we can worship? Well, I want to, it's one or the other. And so they think they're right. They think the pastor's wrong. And in that, I think you just have to ask yourself, do I have like a pride and a control issue? Secondly, I would say, how do you know? Because are you intimate with the books? Like, do you know the controller of the church? Like, are you just kind of on a witch hunt because you think we're spending too much? We're buying the expensive wine for communion, and I disagree with that. Like, do you know this? Like, do you actually know that? And thirdly, I think you're just free to give and let it go. I mean, I'm not saying you want to maximize your kingdom ROI. But you are also free to cut the check and let Jesus deal with it, because you're going to get the credit from Jesus either way. And so I just say I wouldn't lose too much sleep over it unless you know there's like scandalous things going on, and then you probably just need to leave or deal with the situation. But I would say cut the check freely and sleep well at night.
That's good, man. That's a good word, Jeff. I'm tempted to add a little more to that, but I think I'll just water it down because the context of the question matters a lot, right? Because I look at a lot of churches and I had the thought I wouldn't give to that church. The pastor doesn't work hard. You know what I mean? There's no vision. But I would find somewhere to give. Right. Because I'm jealous for a big impact. For whatever I can give. Because what I can give is small to the need that I see out there. So man, when Jesus requires, when he tells the story of the talent, the parable of the talent, the story of the talent. the myth of the talent.
Yeah.
When he tells the parable of the talent, the one who buried it and then gave it back.
Yeah.
Literally, I gave exactly. I didn't lose anything. I didn't steal it. I didn't sell it. I gave it back. Got rebuked.
Mm-hmm.
And then one got a small return and one got 100-fold return.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it just didn't hit me until I started making a little money and dabbling in some investments. It's like, how much risk does it take to get 100% return on your investment?
Right.
A lot.
Right.
A lot of risk. And so it was, oh my gosh, God expects us to take big risks with what he's given us in our time and our talents and our treasure. Mm-hmm. And so when I look at what Lord's allowed Sharon and I to make, it's very small in relationship to the need of the kingdom. Yeah. And so when we're able to give, man, I want the biggest amount of return I can get for that gift. And so both sides of the coin. You should give with no strings attached. You shouldn't care if they burn it after you give it, because your job is to obey Jesus.
Yes.
On the flip side, if there's just blatant laziness, don't reward that.
Yeah.
There's blatant unfaithfulness. We're saying, like, don't split hairs, because numbers lie.
Yeah.
Numbers don't. People want to see the books. They think they can figure it out.
Yeah.
No one who doesn't have their head in it every day, all year long, has a perspective on it. If you come in and look at 10 numbers, you don't know anything.
Yeah.
Because context is everything.
Yeah.
I learned this from you. You know what I mean? As a numbers guy, you got to see everything all the time to know kind of where you're at. Mm-hmm. And so, unless they wanted to spend 8 hours digging into the 23 different spreadsheets you have, they shouldn't have an opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
And even then, depending on how well they handle their finances, they shouldn't have an opinion.
Yeah.
God hasn't called them to steward it. God's called the elders to govern the house, to steward it.
Yeah.
So find elders you support, find a church you can get behind, and fund it as aggressively as you can. And if you're in a church that's middle of the road, fund it anyways. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like we're saying, it's the outside scenario where the guy is a charlatan.
Yes.
The guy is a heretic. The guy is just lazy, and the Bible would say have nothing to do with him. Well, don't reward that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that's not most churches.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if you're listening, no matter where you're at, I mean, our heart in general would be faithfully fund your local church and watch it begin to thrive. Yeah. And Lord will take care of the rest. Yeah. You do your part, and then you're off the hook.
Yep.
I think you said it well.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
Anything to add to this conversation before I wrap it up? 2-part podcast on money and tithing. Woo! Asking all the fun questions. I feel like we can keep going.
Yeah.
We should do like a live radio show. Call in.
Oh, I love that.
Caller from Ohio. You're live on the air with Jeff Weber and Kyle Strong.
That'd be a blast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very fun, guys. Thanks for coming today. Grateful for you both. Grateful for what you've taught me about money and what I learned from you both. Let's keep going.
Hoorah.
Sounds good.
God bless. Hey, everyone. Pastor Josh here. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate the podcast, review, follow, and share. And if you want to support Stronger Man Nation, you can go to strongermannation.com/give to help keep unwoke, uncensored, straight talk Bible teaching coming to you for free.